Good afternoon, members of the media. Thank you for this opportunity to update you on the concluded meeting between a delegation from the People's Progressive Party Civic and the Guyana Elections Commission. This morning, we met with the Commission in an effort to moving the process forward, ensuring that the necessary initiatives are implemented to ensure that we achieve as close as possible the timelines in relation to the recount process. As you're aware, the CARICOM team is here for a period of 25 days. So this is one aspect of the equation. GECOM and the political parties must take into consideration when we examine the timeline and when we examine what is needed to satisfy all the stakeholders and to ensure that the process is completed in a transparent manner with CARICOM here. So we discussed a number of possible measures GECOM can implement to ensure that we achieve not necessarily the target of 25 days, but taking everything into consideration, not to exceed that target by more than a week. So some of the recommendations we put forward were geared at achieving transparency and the shortest possible timeline in completing the recount. As you're aware, the chairperson would have made a public statement that she would like to complete 100 boxes per day. We saw yesterday the initiative of having 2 additional stations giving us 77 boxes. So it is clear that even with the 2 additional stations, much more is needed if we are to achieve the target of 100 boxes per day. One of the first recommendations we looked at and we shared with the Commission is examining a quota system whereby a minimum quota is set for every single station, and those stations work every day until they complete their quota, so that the totality of the quota will be in keeping with the objective of the Commission, the chair, and achieving that target. The second recommendation we looked at was the staff welfare itself. The staff working extended hours, and for GECOM to ensure that they are properly compensated for the additional hours beyond the normal time frame, as an incentive for the staff to not only complete the quota, but to work in ensuring that we achieve the outcome of the recount in the shortest possible time frame and transparently. We also requested that the Commission look at the possibility of additional work hours and the implementation of a shift system. That was another recommendation we discussed with the Commission. We also raised one issue that keeps recurring every day, especially in the morning, and that is decisions that are cleared by the Commission. Decisions that a Commission would have made on previous occasions. What we have seen so far is that in some stations, those issues would pop up again, and then the entire issue is re-examined, although there is a precedent and there is a decision. So We ask for a commitment from GECOM to have these decisions written as part of the basket of issues, and that there is clarity in terms of the briefing to the supervisors at the workstations every morning. In ensuring this clarity, we propose to GECOM that one staff, that is the Chief Elections Officer, take the responsibility of doing this brief in the morning himself. This would ensure that the briefing is consistent, and we don't have different persons with different interpretation and different views giving the brief on different morning, thus creating delays. We also raised the issue of additional stations, because if we are to achieve a target that is within 1 week or outside 1 week of the 25 days, then definitely we have to look at the issue of additional stations. And not only the issue of additional stations, but the allocation of those stations. Because 40%, more than 40% of the boxes that remain are boxes from Region 4. And we have less than 25% of the stations allocated to deal with Region 4. So the output has to be readjusted. And for this to be readjusted, the input, which is a station, need to reflect the current situation where more than 40% of the outstanding boxes are from Region 4. We also asked GECOM, the Commission, to rework the schedule within the present context and with a new initiative so that we can determine a definitive end date. As you would have seen, even in the media, different political parties, there are different views and different equations showing different time frames. Because of the fact that we have CARICOM here and other observers here, we ask that GECOM look at the totality of the current situation and the initiatives that they will implement, and then to come up with a definitive timeline, a new end date for the recount process. We also raised the issue of ensuring CARICOM remains here to the end of this exercise, and we ask that the Commission work with the Commission work with CARICOM to accommodate an extension beyond the 25 days timeline. We also ask that the chairperson and the Commission renew efforts to have other accredited observers, international observers, return to see the process to the end. So these are some of the recommendations, and not issues. They were not issues, they were recommendations, because the focus was on moving the process forward. The process was on looking at solutions to ensure that we can complete this task in a transparent and timely manner. And GECOM, at the conclusion of that meeting, we were advised that GECOM would have a meeting at 11, which I think would have concluded by now, and they will update us of their decisions in relation to the recommendations we would have made. So that was the context of the meeting. Those were the issues discussed and the recommendations discussed. No. Thank you very much for your question. First of all, the quota system does not set a time system. The quota system, because you have stations, for example, yesterday that completed 11 boxes. We have to ensure whatever is implemented adds to transparency, not take away from transparency. So the quota system, all the quota system does is to say there is a minimum standard that we're going to establish for every station, and that standard may be 12 stations now, it has to be about 9 boxes per station. But if you have 2 additional stations that we recommended, then of course it will be less. It might be 8, and that is in keeping with the average that we have been seeing. Now, the second part of the question was.
I asked about the court and whether it would compromise the.
No, no. Well, I don't think it would compromise the transparency, and I think the quota system would add to efficiency, but the focus must always be on enhancing transparency and not.
So just a clarity, you're saying that if a quota system is to be established, that say for example every station should complete say 9 per day, or the minimum of 9 per day. That's what you're saying?
In the current context, it's 12, but if you have 2 additional stations, then it will come down to about 8 boxes per day. And that is in keeping with the target of the chairperson, because the chairperson wants to achieve a target of 100 boxes per day. If we look at the target of 100 boxes per day, that takes us to an extension of 7 days, 1 week. So it is tying all the loose ends together, making the decisions now, and then coming up with that definitive end date. Because CARICOM has to also plan, the observers have to plan, all the stakeholders, the media too. You're out here every day, and you know, all of Guyana would like to know definitively what is the end date we're looking at.
There are 12 workstations right now.
Yes.
Did you have a specific number you wanted that to be increased to? And there's 10 more days to this recount. If we do not complete the additional 1,600 boxes,
Yes.
would you be on the side of an extension of the 2 days?
Well, we have made it very clear that we will support a minimum extension of maybe 7 days. So whatever decisions we take would have to be in that context of ensuring that we don't go too far beyond 7 days extension. But we discussed that also, and we share that.
Workstations would you want to
Well,
add to this?
we did not recommend a specific number, but what we said is that GECOM is an independent commission. They have the protocols established by the COVID task force, and to examine the space within those protocols and come up with a number. I think the commission was talking about a further extension of 2 to 4 stations, so they will be able to tell you what they discussed.
Even though they had their meeting after you, could you say if you were given any assurances at your meeting?
It was a very, very cordial meeting. The chair did give assurances that they're going to examine these issues, and they too are concerned about the timelines and time frame, and they too would want to see the process completed in a transparent manner in a decent time frame.
Were you? I mean, you're there at the recount process every day.
Yes.
Are you satisfied with the way things are going and how things have been progressing?
Well, outside of the slothfulness, I think that outside of the slothfulness, the staff has been more or less acting in a professional manner so far. The issues are more of an operational, are more of in an operational manner, that is day to day. But what we would like to see is consistency, and that is the problem we're having. Decisions and precedents already set previous days are being reopened and rediscussed by some of the supervisors. So the consistency is what caused a lot of delays. For example, there was an issue, I think, yesterday that cost us about 45 minutes, and there was a decision on that issue from the basket of issues. So those are some of the things that are slowing the process down. There's one additional issue that keeps coming up every day, and that is the closure of the container, the time frame. Whilst the order says 5, Mr. Lowenfield re-emphasized today that administratively they would have decided to take it to 5:30. We had instances where this administrative decision would not have been followed, especially by agents who refuse to allow the containers to be open. So that is something they'll be re-examining today at the meeting also.
Mr. Ali, outside of the meeting with the GECOM, will your party if asked win or lose consider power sharing?
Well, right now we are focused on the recount. I did an interview recently where I made it very clear that the future of our country, the future of our people, must be one that is inclusive of ideas, must be one that is participatory, must be one that bring people together and not push people apart. So as we get past this hurdle, definitely you will see a governance system that includes various stakeholders in the development process and in advancing our country. But outside of that, we have important issues to discuss as a result of what took place not only during this election, but from the no confidence motion to now. That we must examine as a people. We can't have a country being unsettled like this for such a long period. It is not good for business. It is not good for investors. It is not good for government. It is not good for media. It is not good for our citizens. And we have to ensure that we tighten up areas that need tightening up, that we have processes that are adhered to, and our democratic institutions are preserved.
Does that inclusion that we talk about is also at the executive level of government? And therefore the executive
I have not defined. Inclusion means being a part of the process. Inclusion is about being part of the development trust of the country. Now, if you look at governance structure all across the world, you will see that there is a shift of responsibility and the governance structure. There is an oversight shift towards more parliamentary type of committees and subcommittees that has greater reach and greater responsibility in terms of the branches of government. So all of these are things you have to look at. We have seen reforms in the parliamentary system. You have seen how useful the Public Accounts Committee can be, which is shared by the opposition, the Economic Services Committee. And with different sectors coming on stream, you have to find a model that allows that oversight responsibility to even go beyond the political system, to bring in other stakeholders from civil society. Because you have a lot of talent out there, you have a lot of technically competent people that are not within the political arena, if you want to put it that way, but there are services that are critical. They have expertise, they have competence, that are critical for the development of our country. So a governance structure cannot only look narrowly at political interests and political parties. It has to look at the national structure, the national trust of government, where you see the country going, and how is it we incorporate the multifaceted talents and skill sets out there in a governance structure that ensures Guyana wins at the end of the day.
Mr. Ali, when you say inclusive governance, let me just see if I can clarify what you just said. You mean a strengthening of the legislature, but not including other parties in the executive?
No. I said inclusive. The focus must not be on form. The focus has to be on outcome. Inclusive is including in decision making. I'm not limiting it to the parliamentary level. You can be inclusive in the decision making, in the development trust, in having national consensus, in creating trust. These are important things that are needed in our society today.
Well, I believe his question was about executive governance, right?
So executive governance,
allow another party to be a part of the executive government.
I will say to you that at the executive level, we will allow ideas, we will allow participation by not only political parties, but by civil society, by the private sector, by as much stakeholders as possible in building a national movement and a national thrust in taking our country forward.
How is that different?
So I'm curious about how can you extend an olive branch for that when the TUC itself had not participated, for instance, in several committees at the parliamentary level, not even appointing a deputy speaker and not appointing people to state boards. So how do you now extend that olive branch?
I don't think it is that simplistic the way you put it, Mr. Moore, with the greatest of respect. The appointment of the deputy speaker had a lot of issues surrounding that because there were other things that we raised that were not consistent with the parliamentary oversight. But I don't want to get into that. I don't want to get too much into the past. Because if you look at what constituted the Public Accounts Committee, you had ministers themselves sitting on the Public Accounts Committee. We participated fully at every sectorial level of the parliament. But then, for example, remember there was a security subcommittee that was formed that never met, the Constitutional Reform Committee. So we have to look at this in a holistic manner. You can't ask for participation in one area and then in the holistic approach to governance, you're shutting people out. That is what we have to
Are
avoid.
there specific issues that you are willing to cooperate on? In the past, we saw the communique between President Boyd and President Jaggi with specific issues, broadcasting.
Yeah, well,
Are there specific issues
right.
that you are hoping to collaborate on and you list those?
Great question. I have not listed a specific issue, but I have a fair idea of what is taking place. And I must say that I had the opportunity of serving as a resource person on the Depressed Community Needs Committee, which was as a result of that communique. Whatever collaboration and the form of the collaboration has to be able to build trust, national trust among each other. As citizens, we have to have a common agenda in terms of our development. Every Guyanese must feel involved and part of that development. For that to happen, you can't only have a development agenda that reflects the need of supporters of one political party. So we have to be able to bring together leaders not narrowly defined by political party, but leaders across our country to build that national consensus on the development path. We have a base document in the manifesto that we have to develop because you're elected. We have to implement because you're elected based on your manifesto. But we have to be able to craft this national agenda that will have ownership from all the stakeholders. And that is important. How do we create ownership from all the stakeholders of our country in the outcome for Guyana? How do we ensure that every single Guyanese believe that the management of the oil and gas, the management of the oil and gas sector would ensure that their future is secure and the future generations are secure, would ensure transparency, would ensure accountability, would ensure that Guyana benefits. That is just one example. For that to happen, we have to have a cross-section of Guyanese being part or involved in the structure of the sector itself. So things like that, constitutional reform, national consultation on that. These are things that are important, electoral reform. So at a subsequent time, I can address, because we have to put our minds to it. We have to start addressing these issues because the focus would have to be very soon. I'm already focused on moving forward, taking the country forward, creating a framework that Guyanese can be proud of, feel a part of, that can break down barriers and create opportunity for all. So at a subsequent time,
Yeah, but I just wanted to, since my friend asked a question about inclusionary, how do you intend to even start something like this in a society that is deeply divided politically and along ethnic lines and economically too? There are people on different income earnings. So how would you go about even attempting to do this?
it sounds very complex, but at the end of the day, we are dealing with humans. Humans react in different ways based on how they perceive their circumstances to be. That is why there are some key pillars. Building national trust. Working on a system and set of programs that reduces inequality. Creating opportunities across the board. Building an economy that creates new jobs. Building an educational system that gives a basic, good level of access to all Guyanese. Having a healthcare system that does not differentiate. Providing services at the government level that is affordable and that is efficient to all Guyanese. And importantly, not only looking at a top-down approach in governance. A lot of times we focus on the big picture. And what is critical is the bottom-up approach. It is what is happening at a community level. What is happening at the various strata of society? What are the risk factors? And what is it, sometimes very small projects? What is it that is needed to heal the little fracture in our society down to the grassroots level? And implementing a set of measures. And some of you would remember the Depressed Community Needs Committee came at a time when it was very difficult in our country politically. But a set of at-risk communities were identified. And a system was built to reduce the tension and to build public trust in the system. And that is important. And the type of governance where people feel involved, where people see themselves as having a better future, where people see themselves as being part of the development process, help to create that atmosphere and environment.
Mr. Ali, what you're saying sounds very poetic, but could you speak directly to the governance structure that the PPP envisioned?
I don't want to. I don't want to be disrespectful. I don't want to be disrespectful because I have tremendous respect for the media. But I don't believe you can describe what I said as being poetic. This is not being poetic. These are not broad statements. These are very, if you understand how the governance structure works, if you understand how development works, if you understand how society works, if you understand how the systems of government work, then you would understand that these are very targeted, well-defined structural initiatives to take our country forward.
Sir, you spoke of trust between the parties, and a country should come together on national issues like border issues. And
Definitely.
right now we are in two climates that are troubling to our country. One is being currently resolved. This is the current political situation, and we have the pandemic.
Yes.
Right, but we're seeing not a unified approach to tackling and dealing with COVID-19. The incumbent is doing it on one part, and your party has taken another avenue to deal with the with COVID. Why isn't there a unified approach then? You know, if we're going to start somewhere, because COVID is not only a national issue, it's a global issue.
Yeah, so you have to, first of all, agree with me that COVID-19 came at a time in our country when, with this great political fracture. We cannot isolate you see, in dealing with a problem, we have to look at the internal and external environment. We can't isolate the problem and behave as if it doesn't exist. We have to work within the context of the problem. When COVID-19 approached, what we did, we had a meeting with PAHO representatives here in Guyana and the UN rep. And we made it very clear that we are willing and ready to work with a technical, with the technicians and the technical bodies within the governance structure in a unified manner to deal with this issue. We went further. to write to the chief medical officer, outlining a number of initiative measures and asking a series of questions that were critical and important in the management of the pandemic. So these are things that we did. But as I said, I don't want to get into all these side issues at the moment. Very important issue, very important issues. But our focus now is on this recount. But I assure you that I will be available consistently and constantly to the media to discuss how we move forward as a people and as a country. Thank you very much for your time.
Let's go by way of questions.
Yeah, sure. Mr. Alexander, the commission would have met this morning with the People's Progressive Party Civic. Mr. Ali just told us about some recommendations the department would have made to the commission to essentially speed up the recount process, but also make the next 10 days, which, the deadline will be up. Could you give us an understanding of whether or not the commission will consider any of these recommendations?
Or have considered, because we understand that we had a meeting afterwards.
The nature of the commission is, in fact, to listen and to consider. So, yes. But I think we had a clear understanding based on the contribution of the leader of the opposition that even as we try to accelerate the process, it will be difficult for us to achieve 25 days. I think he conceded that without being urged to do so. So yes, we are going to consider what they have said, but the issue of 25 days, there's no guarantee that we'll make the 25 days. In fact, 25 days was always an estimate, which we said we would review. And the review is ongoing. The fact that we have 2 additional stations working, this is a result of that review, and the review would continue. One of the propositions was additional stations, and as I said, we are in the habit of giving consideration to what's proposed, so that is being considered.
Do you see additional stations in addition to the 2 that you just recently established?
That is being considered.
How many more? Another 2, another 5?
I can't say how many more, certainly not 5.
And will you be seeking the approval of the task force?
We would continue to have the involvement of COVID. I had reason to make the point that the people who contend that GECOM is autonomous and that no one can tell them what to do, they have a wrong understanding of the law. Of course, GECOM has its jurisdiction, and its jurisdiction is about the conduct of elections, and no other authority can tell them how to conduct the elections. But the question before us is not merely a question of elections. It's a health issue, a national health issue, And in those circumstances, there would be some other body that has authority in that regard. And GECOM has to work with that body. GECOM cannot say that they're a constitutional body and therefore they need not pay regard to anyone else. The same way in which GECOM has its jurisdiction, others have their jurisdiction. And we have to have mutual respect among the organs of the state.
Based on your own analysis of what's going on inside and your discussions, how many more stations do you see, is needed?
But there's need and want are two different things. Given the space in there, we're going to be hard put, if at all, to get to.
The commission had, when they approached the task force, was for more than 2 stations, and those
We had identified more than 2 possible
places,
places.
and those weren't approved. So what's different with this proposal? Is it that you're going to use all the spaces outside of the conference center?
The exploration will continue. We go back to them as well.
Mr. Alexander, when could we expect GECOM to give its first revision of the timeline? Sorry.
Well, we haven't set ourselves when we would do that, but certainly, as we have to do that before the 25th, because any revision of the timeline has to be gazetted the way in which the estimated time was gazetted.
Sir, outside of that, could you say if the commission or the secretariat met on the boxes that have the incorrect OLEs?
And the unmarked ballots.
And the unmarked ballots.
Sorry,
These ballots, these
unstamped.
unstamped ballots.
All right. That discussion continued today in relation to the ballots that did not have the 6-digit stamps. And there were 2 scenarios. I think the last time I mentioned 3. There were 2 scenarios clearly being discussed. That is a scenario where apparently half of the original ballot paper was stamped and the other half was not stamped. And there seemed to be the emergent view that recognition has to be given to the on-half stamped, on condition that there is synergy between the stamped and the unstamped. In other words, it's the same number of ballots. So you know clearly that it's the same number of documents, but that just the stamp was placed on one half and not on the other half. In a similar manner, there is an emergent consensus that in the instance where we can identify the discipline services ballots, which are intermixed and not stamped, that those should be equally recognized as valid votes.
These unstamped ballots were counted after the elections. I'm trying to understand what happened.
Yes, they would have been counted and they would have been treated as not valid.
Treated as not valid.
Yes.
In keeping with the law.
In keeping with the letter of the law.
And you're now considering a remedy that is outside the law.
I wouldn't say the remedy is outside of the law. I would say the remedy is within the spirit of the law. And let's make this point. Law has different approaches. You have statutory laws in which no one is allowed to exercise a discretion. It's black and white, yes or no. But generally in the law is intended to deal with a mischief. It's intended to address a particular situation. And therefore, one can go to the understanding of the mischief it's intended to address. And in the context of that mischief, one can in fact seek to interpret the law to provide for something which may not be as clear as black and white in the first instance.
Well, how do you conclude
No.
that there was no mischief?
Well, the word mischief here doesn't mean mischief. It doesn't mean mischief. Let me finish. When we stamp a ballot, the real intention is to ensure that no one else at no particular time is able to insert a ballot that is not valid. So the stamp is intended to give more security and integrity to GECOM's ballot. In our circumstances, if we can discern that the issue of integrity is not at risk, in the circumstance where someone may be disenfranchised, then you have to come down on the side of the potential disenfranchised person. So that's the kind of interpretation one has to give in these circumstances. So it's not against, in my view, it's not against the law. It's an application of the law using the starting point of what was the intention of the law, and therefore still striving to achieve that intention.
How would you be able to differentiate the discipline services ballot from the rest of the ballots?
That is not possible. Suffice to say that the application of that decision is pertinent to a situation where the number of unstamped ballots are equal to the number of intermixed discipline services ballots.
Okay. And what about the mix-up in the OLEs? I know that the presiding officers were expected to be called in by GECOM. Could you see if that was done?
I myself wasn't here yesterday. My report yesterday is that they were called in and had not shown. I've had no further report on the matter.
So those boxes are still...
I would presume they're still
And could
parked.
you say from yesterday to today if there were any other irregularity, discrepancies, or anything of the sort that emerged since?
Not to my knowledge.
Mr. Alexander, there is one political stakeholder that's very concerned about these observation statements. And you had said previously it is your understanding that at the end of a district, the commission would perhaps look at the observation statements with a view of addressing them. Has GECOM made an official decision to address District 1 and 2, for instance?
We are awaiting the summation by the Secretariat, and as soon as that is ready, the Commission will be looking at them.
This means that the Secretariat is to take all the observation reports and put it into one document
For the district.
for the district.
For the district.
Okay. And finally, Mr. Alexander, could you say what GECOM's role is in matters of criminal fraud where the election is concerned?
What is GECOM's role?
Yes. In identifying, in investigating, in prosecuting, and what exactly?
I presume that GECOM could be involved in prosecution.
What does the law say?
I presume that GECOM could be involved in prosecution. It is illegal in this country not to be registered. And GECOM is the authority on the matter. And I think that GECOM in that regard could prosecute. And so there are a number of other things that GECOM can prosecute for. GECOM does not have its own arm. And so GECOM in the past may have referred matters for prosecution to the police. The record of prosecution and even charges is not a good record. There's been little or no action in the many instances over the many years, if not decades, that GECOM has referred matters to the police. We do not have our own prosecution arm. I don't think it's impossible for us to have that, but we don't. And so matters that require prosecution, for all intents and purposes, GECOM would refer to the police.
Does the law speak to altering of the election's results and matters like that?
I don't know that there's something explicit, but I would think in all circumstances there's provision in the law for a matter like that.
Has the Commission given itself a timeline to address the timeline of the recount and also the unstamped ballot and partially stamped ballot issues?
I don't think we've given ourselves a timeline. I think we want to do it as soon as possible.
But it has occupied several Commission's meetings. So
Yes.
So just for clarity, the decision on the discipline services issue, the unstamped ballots, that was conferenced or?
I said the emergent decision.
Oh.
The emergent decision.
Mr. Alexander, given what has taken place in the past few days in the recount process, do you see or would you agree
agree that there is need for strengthening of electoral laws?
Without the recount process, I felt so. And I think this is public knowledge. Without the recount process, I mean, we've had the issue. I have been concerned from the inception about registration and the need for periodic registration. And there are other elements that should be up for review.
Mr. Alexander, would GECOM be handing over the investigation of the Mingo matter to the police?
GECOM has not discussed that, and so no such decision has been made. I think GECOM's focus right now is on the recount and ensuring that we have, as soon as possible, a final position on the elections. Other matters, I think, will come after we have been able to do that.
So you're done for the
We spoke with the presidential candidate for the People's Progressive Party, Mr. Irfan Ali, following a meeting with the Guyana Elections Commission, and then we spoke with Mr. Vincent Alexander, one of the GECOM commissioner, as the commission would have met after that meeting. Mr. Ali, in his interview, spoke of some of the issues that they would have raised with the commission, those issues including the need for a further increase in the recount stations that the commission is using. They would have moved from 10 to 12, and now the party is asking for a further increase. They also asked for the time of day for the recount, which is currently from 8 to 7 p.m. to be increased, and for some of the issues that they would have raised to be addressed to ensure that the commission is able to complete the recount in a timely manner. Mr. Alexander said that the commission would take into consideration the need for the increase in the recount stations, and he made it clear that it is unlikely that the commission will be able to complete the recount in 25 days. While GECOM has not agreed on an official extension to the 25 days, they're looking to see how they can speed up the process before they give a final date on when the recount can complete, given that the CARICOM team also raised concerns that they are here for 25 days. The commission is seeing what it can be done. Mr. Alexander said that they're looking to increase the recount stations, even though the previous amount that they had wanted to increase was not agreed by the task force. They're looking at ways again on how they can increase the recount stations, and they will bring that again to the task force for approval. He said that the commission is looking at other issues, and there have been two things that came up during the interview, and one is in relation to the unstamped ballots that they have been finding in the ballot boxes. As you open the ballot boxes, the stamp is placed on the ballots to ensure that no fake ballots or no ballot that is not supposed to be in that box could be there. However, some have been found without the stamps, and GECOM has decided that if they can determine that those stamps are from the discipline services, as you know, the discipline services voted 2 weeks before the general elections, and then their ballots were intermixed in the ballot boxes and the places where they actually reside. So if the commission can find that in one instance there's a ballot box with 2 discipline service voters and 2 ballots were found unstamped, so it can be a case where the discipline service votes were unstamped, then they will ensure that those ballots are counted. At the close of poll on elections day, those ballots were not counted because according to the law, they are not valid. GECOM is also looking to deal with the observation reports for regions 1 and 2, as they would have decided that they will deal with the observation reports at the end of the district. However, Mr. Alexander said the Secretariat has not yet presented a summation of those observations at the end of those districts. So they're awaiting those summations to look into the issues that would have been raised during the recount exercise. And there was also, Mr. Alexander was also asked about the Mingo issue. As you know, the returning officer for Region 4, Mr. Claremont Mingo, reportedly increased the numbers of votes for the coalition during the counting of ballots at the end of March 2nd. And he said that the commission has not yet looked at that matter. What they're focusing now is on the recount, and after the recount, they will look at all issues arising out of the entire electoral process. We'll continue to bring you updates from outside of the Artichoke Conference Center on the national recount that is ongoing here. I am Bibi Katoon.